Welcome to another episode of Before You Kill Yourself with your host, Leo Flowers. I am Leo Flowers. Today's guest is Jodie Ellenor, who is an anxiety expert extraordinaire. Extraordinaire, people. Spell that 3 times in a row. Who helps women heal anxiety holistically so they can spend more time enjoying life and less time fearing it. Oh, yeah. About a program, Holistic Anxiety Fix is a holistic healing service that focuses on helping women to heal anxiety so that they can embrace life with calm confidence. Oh, I need some of that right there. The program integrates more traditional therapeutic approaches for healing anxiety with modern functional medicine approaches for a truly mind body experience to healing. Welcome to the podcast, Jodie Ellenor.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. Now, Jodie's already informed me that there might be some kids running around in the background. We don't know if it's her kids or whose kids it is, but just notice that there might be some joy being heard in the background.
Thank you. Hopefully they keep it to a minimum here.
So I typically when people are on and their focus is like anxiety or depression or suicidality, they themselves have had some experience with anxiety or the thing that they are trying to help others with. What's your experience with anxiety?
Yeah, I would say your perception's pretty accurate. My own journey to anxiety got me to help other women with anxiety. So it's a pretty intense journey. We'd probably need about 4 hours to go through it all. But I'll give you the Coles Notes version. So for me, my anxiety started about 5 to 7 years after some pretty significant gut issues. And I assumed at the time that it was just related to ongoing chronic gut health. And so it got to the point where I was having, panic attacks to shows like MasterChef, which was, pretty weird to me because I could watch MasterChef 3 years earlier and it was exciting, but I wasn't having a panic attack to it. And then all of a sudden I'm sitting on my couch with my heart racing and I can't breathe. And I'm like, what is going on here? And then it also was a struggle for me to drive across the city to see friends. I was having trouble working out was a struggle. So all of a sudden I went from, I was managing to, I really couldn't function at all. And it came pretty quick for me. So this is where I started to get into deeper levels of healing with my own journey because the traditional ways that, people address anxiety wasn't working for me.
And so can you talk to us about what the traditional ways of treating anxiety that weren't working for you? Because so many people are, going down these rabbit holes of trying to treat their own anxiety and are probably, coming up short as you felt you did. What were some of the traditional methods that you used that didn't seem to be effective for you?
Yeah, I hear this a lot too from women that I speak to about what they're trying. So the common ones are mindfulness practice. And this isn't to dismiss that practice. Like, I think it's a great practice, but sometimes you reach a certain level of anxiety, especially if your body's really off, where you're doing mindfulness, but you feel more anxious because you're like, oh my gosh, is this the state my body's in? And so sometimes it doesn't help for people. And that was the case for me. Like, I'd done a mindfulness-based stress reduction program a couple of years before my anxiety hit, and it was lovely for me. I loved it. And then I upgraded and did a little bit deeper work when my anxiety hit, and I actually had a really hard time doing practices that had initially come very easily for me. So it was very interesting for me to look at that. I see mindfulness a lot. Talk therapy is another really big one. And I'm trained as a therapist. So, I think there's definitely a time and a place for therapy. And I do use therapeutic techniques with people, but it doesn't always get to the full root causes of what's going on. And then the other really big one, and this is an avenue I personally didn't take, but I know it's very commonly recommended, is medication, right? So we get kind of medication, yoga, talk therapy, and meditation. Those are the common kind of approaches, the more quote unquote traditional approaches, I hear a lot of women going through, and I've gone through part of them myself when it comes to healing.
And for you, what have you found to be the hidden causes of anxiety?
Yeah, there's a lot of hidden causes to anxiety. So, when people think about anxiety, instantly they think about like, I need to go talk to a therapist. It's all in my mind. But I love focusing on the physical causes of anxiety, which not a lot of people think about. It's not on people's radars. You're not going to go to your, MD, your medical doctor, your primary care provider, and they're not necessarily going to explore these issues. What likely is going to happen is they're going to run a whole bunch of testing, and they're going to say, your blood work is normal. We ran, a Holter monitor on you. Everything is fine. So there's nothing to worry about, right? But what I look at is more imbalances physically that's going on. And there can be, a lot of different categories to what I see around physical imbalances. And the first and kind of easiest one to go after is actually diet. So a lot of people, they think they're eating healthy. So I get this a lot, oh, I'm eating healthy. I eat vegetables. I don't drink a lot of soda. So we're good. We're good on the diet front. But when we're talking about diet, I'm talking about inflammatory foods. So like, are you eating breads? Do you eat pasta? Do you have a muffin every now and then? Because the gluten in those ingredients for a lot of women are actually what's triggering a nervous system response that causes anxiety. Sugar is another really big one, right? We're feeding parasites. We're causing blood sugar imbalances. So if you're eating sugar in your diet, and it doesn't need to be like sitting there binging on like sugary candy, it can just be, if you're having sugars in everything. And so if you're not watching what you're eating and you're eating gluten and dairy and sugar, then that's going to send your entire system into an inflammatory state. And that's going to lead to anxiety. So like right away, that's a big, easy hidden cause that people don't think about.
I love that you tied in imbalances into what we're eating, because a lot of times we do think of imbalances just in terms of work-life balance
Mhm.
or, physical balance. One leg is shorter than the other. But there's also a dietary balance of maybe on the flip side, we are eating quote unquote healthy foods, anti-inflammatory foods, but maybe we're consuming too much. I've been guilty of consuming way too much spinach and too many oranges. So we have people who, myself included, who like when I find out a food is healthy, I overconsume it, and so then I create another imbalance where I got too much vitamin C or too much vitamin D circulating through my blood system. Have you found that?
Not necessarily in that way, but in a way that you probably wouldn't think about. So, a lot of people will go on like more of a paleo style diet, and then they're like, this is supposed to make me feel better. And I actually feel worse. And so this happens when there's an issue called a histamine issue. And a lot of people don't even have this on their radar, but histamine is a response in the body that we get. A lot of times it's causes allergies. So seasonal allergies is a histamine-based response. It can cause gut issues. It can cause heart palpitations. And it's typically there because of an estrogen detox issue. But for most people, it's there because they're living in mold. And it's causing gut issues. And so women and men that are, trying to eat healthy are often eating foods that are high in histamines, and it's creating more of an anxiety response. And this is actually what was happening to me. So, all the nuts I was eating, all the smoothies I was having in the morning, I was literally drinking a histamine cocktail. I had no idea. I was like, oh, this is a detox reaction. I just need to push through it. But I was actually making the situation worse because, I think of it like a cup. So, histamines are supposed to be there in manageable amounts. But if someone's histamine cup is full and overflowing and they eat histamine foods, then all of a sudden, all of those symptoms that I'm talking about become more pronounced, and people don't realize it. They're like, well, I don't know. I just get these waves of random anxiety from nowhere. Right.
So talk to me because we have we have two NutriBullets in the Vitamix. And I think most of the country in the world, we all fallen victim to the NutriBullet commercials and all the things we can put in that tiny little blender and get all our nutrients for the week and day. What are the histamine foods that people are putting in their smoothie? I love that you call it a histamine cocktail. What's a histamine cocktail? Break it down for me.
Okay. I will share with you my histamine cocktail that led me running to the washroom every morning, thinking I was having a great detox reaction. So berries, blueberries, strawberries, spinach is high in histamine. Nut butters are high in histamine. So if you're putting in, almond butter in your smoothie in the morning, even avocado is high in histamine, right? So when you think about, I know a common smoothie for a lot of people is, the berry smoothie where you're adding in the nut butters and you're putting in avocado for a nice fat. And so that's literally a histamine cocktail. Fermented foods is another one. So like the kombucha that you're eating, the probiotics, there's only one brand of probiotics that's not high in histamine. So, all of those things that are supposed to, quote unquote, make you feel better. If you have a histamine issue, you're going to feel worse and probably not connect the dots.
Oh my God. You know what? I could see somebody just throwing their hands up in the air right now because, I've had other dietitians and nutritionists on here and people talk and, and one person says, have spinach. Another person's like, eat your nut butters. And then you're like coming through with the sledgehammer, like no berries, no spinach, no nut butters, the avocado. So are you saying don't have this at all? Or are you saying it just might be the quantity that we are ingesting this stuff?
Okay, really good question. So for most people, those things are really, really healthy things to eat. So those nutritionists and guests that you've had on are speaking completely accurately. When it becomes a problem is when someone's histamine level in their body gets too high. So it can be for a variety of reasons. If you're living in mold, for example, that's going to trigger a histamine response. If your gut is a hot mess, that's going to trigger a histamine response. And these are responses that are, they're ongoing. And for a lot of women, the histamine response gets worse right before they bleed. So right before your menstruation, when you're already feeling woo-woo, PMSy, all over the place, the histamine response naturally gets higher. And so it just kind of heightens all of those PMS symptoms. So if you're somebody whose body can't detox histamine or your histamine cup is kind of chronically full, then these foods are going to make things worse. If you're somebody who doesn't have a histamine issue, then you'll be able to eat these foods and you'll feel great. So there's kind of two camps of people.
Yeah, and so yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because it definitely is nothing's a one size fit all because as you mentioned earlier, mindfulness practice works for some people, talk therapy works for some people, and then for others it could be too stimulating or whatever or too dysregulating. Now let me ask you about bananas, and I'm bringing this up for my own selfish reasons because. I just found out I'm 45 and I was just diagnosed with asthma. I had an asthma attack in January. And so my listeners are probably tired of hearing me asking people about my asthma. But once again, there's so much out there. And I was prescribed a pill for my asthma that was causing depression and suicidal ideation. So I recently read that bananas are no bueno for asthma. Is that because of the histamines? Do you know?
It could be. Bananas can be high in histamines. So it is something that you can be cautious of. Again, it's like a cup, right? So one banana is probably not going to do it for you unless your cup is like overflowing. But if you have a histamine issue, bananas is one of those foods. So what I typically tell people to do is go and eat a bunch of high histamine foods and see what happens. Do your symptoms get worse? Like, do you start to feel crazy? Does your asthma get worse when you drink kombucha and have some bone broth Bone broth is another big one. If you eat those things and you feel worse, then you can start to tie it. Do it a couple of times, right? So like take a break for a couple of days and then introduce it again. And if you're starting to see those responses, then you can start to piece it together that that's what's causing your symptoms. It's histamine based issue. And that clues you in to dive deeper. Are you living in mold? Right? Do you have mast cell issues going on? What's causing this histamine to be in high levels? Because we're not born that way. It's a response to something else that's triggering it.
Right. We live in an area that's still building itself, and there's a lot of construction happening in the area. And I don't know if that contributes to histamine levels, because I'm assuming that when we're talking about histamine, we're talking about more food and plants. But are construction areas a thing? Because I would assume like mold could be being kicked up as they're tearing down things around us.
Yeah, that's more for somebody who might have like mast cell activation syndrome. So, and let me just explain what that is, because that's another thing that's very much overlooked. It's very difficult to get a proper diagnosis. It is medical, but a lot of doctors don't know about it and they don't test it. And so this is where your mast cells, I just like to explain it as they get really excited and they start to dump their contents at all times. And so mast cells are part of the immune system. They're a natural part of the immune system, and they're designed to keep the body safe. But when they get really overactive, then they start dumping their contents at all times. And inside of mast cells are histamines. So if you have a condition that your mast cells are going off all the time, then going into an environment that's moldy or that has toxins in the air from construction, that's going to trigger your mast cells, because it'll see that as, foreign invaders in the body and then be like, oh my gosh, we need to keep her or him safe, and then dump their contents, which causes the histamine cup to fill up, which then causes like a huge anxiety response or, lots of other symptoms. There's massive amounts of symptoms associated with histamines.
So are you saying mast cells like MASSCELL?
MAST, mast cells.
Mast cells. Okay.
And it's MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome, is when you are looking it up. That's how you would look that up.
And then, I also want to highlight, I really appreciate you talking about when your cup is overfull with the histamines, because it goes back to, I don't want listeners to get a feeling like it's an all or nothing proposition. It's really about knowing how big your cup is for histamines, for mast cells, for, being with family. Like, we got the holidays coming up. So we all have different cups. Somebody else used the analogy of like parking spaces. I only have so many parking spaces for work, for family, for working out, all these different things. So but that's more of us being in tune with ourselves and being quiet long enough to be aware of that. When we talked about the hidden causes for anxiety, you talked about imbalances, and we talked about the foods we're eating, inflammatory foods, looking at gluten, looking at sugar. And then we're also talked about histamines. Is there anything else that we have not discussed in terms of hidden causes of anxiety?
Yeah. Copper toxicity. And, when I say that, a lot of people are like, well, I don't work in a factory. Pretty sure I'm good there. And that's not actually the case, because most women that I test are actually copper toxic. And it comes from, so copper, first of all, it's an important mineral in the body. You need copper to function. Its opposite is zinc. So we like to see a really nice, healthy copper zinc balance, right? But for a lot of women, copper becomes really, really high. And the interesting thing about copper is that it's stored in the brain, it's stored in the liver, and it causes anxiety. It causes a lot of PMS-based symptoms. It can cause racing thoughts. It activates your adrenal glands and, causes all of this panic when it's in high levels. And so there's a couple of main reasons why we see copper high. So the first is actually if you've been on any form of birth control. So this is for the women listening, any form of birth control for 2 years or more. Because what happens, whether it's an IUD, even if it's not a copper IUD, if it's any sort of hormonal birth control, it's going to lead to artificial estrogen dominance in the body. And so this is when your estrogen is higher than your progesterone. Okay. And so when that happens, estrogen gets stored in the tissues copper gets stored in the tissue. So anytime estrogen is higher than progesterone, your body just naturally stores copper. So I want you to think about, I talk to women who've been on the pill for 20 years, right? So that's 20 years of their body storing copper. So you don't notice it right away, but then like 4 years in, 5 years in, 6 years in, you start to feel a little anxious and you're like, why do I feel anxious? Starts out kind of like a new norm. And 20 years later, you're like so anxious over every little thing and you have no idea why. It's because your body is full of copper. Now, the interesting piece is it's not going to show up on your blood chemistry. You're not going to, it's going to be stored deep within the tissue. So your body tries to keep the copper levels as calm and in your blood chemistry in general. They want to keep it as stable as possible. And they do that at the cost of what's going on at a cellular level. So when I run a hair test on people, I see copper show up right away on the hair test. But what I typically see is very depleted calming minerals. So we see, low potassium, I see low magnesium. And this is because the copper has caused so much stress in the body that they burned through their calming minerals. So, birth control is one way. Another way is pregnancy. So I talk to a lot of women who have postpartum anxiety. And yes, hormones are a part of this. And that's a whole other story. But copper also is a part because copper naturally increases for women during pregnancy. And the idea is it's supposed to decrease once you're done being pregnant. But for some women, they can't detox copper. So each successive pregnancy they have, the copper just continues to accumulate in the body. And so they end up being copper toxic. I also see it with a condition called Pyrrole Disorder. And this causes, for a variety of factors, it just causes zinc to dump out of the body. And then we see high levels of copper instead. And so, those are the main reasons I see copper toxicity. And when I first ran a hair test on myself, and for several months afterwards, like several tests, I should say it was a couple of years for me, my copper was actually 3 times higher than the test would measure. So it's like off the charts and then some, right? So I can really speak to how painful, and I say that because anxiety is almost a painful level of anxious. It can be when you have copper toxicity. And, some of those looping thoughts on things that don't make any sense, like, people that are worried about death and there's no risk of death, or like think that something in their food is going to contaminate them. And they're like, logically, I know this is not going to happen. And yet they can't stop thinking about it. Those kinds of things where your doctor's like, you just need to go on medication because there's nothing we can do here. That is sometimes a copper issue.
Wow. So you brought up something, you talked about magnesium and potassium as being calming minerals.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me more about that. Are you saying that women should be taking magnesium and potassium in a supplement form, or are there foods that we can get that from?
Yeah, I like to do foods. I have potassium recipes for people. A good, easy one is coconut milk, not coconut milk, coconut water has about 15 to 20% of your day's required potassium. So that's a really good one. Mbeshi plums, super weird, but also really high in potassium, or like good electrolyte drinks like Vega 40,000 volts by Trace Elements or Trace Minerals is a really good one as well. But it's really important. They estimate about 90 to 99% of women are potassium deficient in this era. I think we're just so stressed that we can't, keep up with potassium stores. And we also know that our foods are becoming more and more depleted of minerals because of, the growing conditions. And so I heard somewhere that a carrot that we ate in the year 2000, we'd now have to eat 4 of those carrots to get the same amount of nutrients today, which is pretty crazy, right? So, eating foods that are high in magnesium and potassium are important, but often it's supplementing for it, at least to get things back on track. I'm cautious with broadbanding, like everyone should take it, because I really think there's a value in testing, and hair testing is what I tend to use for that. But it is definitely, if you're experiencing anxiety, chances are you're low in both.
Okay, so I just realized my listeners have to be pulling their hair out. Like, all right, if there's a histamine cocktail, what's the antihistamine cocktail? Because people aren't going to throw out their NutriBullet. So if I'm making a smoothie, what am I putting in there?
Yeah, low. It's hard to make a smoothie. It's hard to make a smoothie. Breakfasts are difficult if you're low histamine. And the solution is to eat low histamine foods until you figure out why you have high histamines, right? So it's getting to the root of why your histamines are high in the first place. So if it's mold, it's detoxing the mold, for example, and getting that out of your system. So then the histamine issue goes away. So then you can just eat normal foods again.
That makes sense, because I lived in a place that it was high in mold and I was getting sick all the time. And then as soon as I moved, all my headaches and my runny eyes, gutted, everything, just not everything, but a lot of symptoms went away on their own. And checking your place for mold is big, especially in a lot of places where it rains.
Yeah. And people don't realize that, right? Like, I lived in a moldy apartment for years. I just thought it was haunted. I was like, let's move my bed around here. There's bad feng shui. This is why I'm not sleeping. And it had nothing to do with it being haunted. There was mold behind the wall. I learned later water was leaking from the apartment above me to the apartment below me. I didn't see any of it. I couldn't smell it. It was haunted, but by mold, really.
I know these tiny spores that get in our body and wreak havoc. I mean, really, that's what every alien predator movie is about. Some tiny thing laying their eggs. And then, so in terms of hidden causes, we talked about imbalances. We talked about histamines. We talked about copper toxicity. Are there any other hidden causes to anxiety that people aren't aware of?
Those I would say are the big ones, right? Those are the really big ones. Parasites is another one, and Lyme. That's another one as well. The Lyme is a bit of a rabbit hole to go down. I feel like the medical community and even the functional medicine community, we really don't have a good handle on that one. We don't have great testing on it. We can't test co-infections, and these are infections that come along with the Lyme. So that when you've kind of ruled out all the lower hanging fruit and you're still like, I don't feel good, that's when you go and do a Lyme test. And parasites, I had a giant worm living inside of me. You can't tell me that, a 6-inch worm isn't causing me anxiety. Pretty sure it is. Pretty sure. So, parasites are one that we often overlook. Everyone assumes, if you're living in, a fairly clean environment and, you're not going through some tropical country, that you don't have a parasite issue. And that's a really big mistake because, you think about it, we do parasite cleanses with our animals. We did parasite cleanses 100 years ago, and then magically they don't exist in the human body anymore. So a lot of times parasites are a contributor to how you're feeling.
What's a parasite? What would a parasite cleanse look like for humans?
Yeah, it's herbs that you take that clear them out, sometimes over the counter or prescription medication, depending on who you're going to. And with herbs, it's usually about 60 days of herbal protocols that will just clear out the parasites. So you don't have to go on, strong medications to get well.
All right. So I keep rehashing because I want the listeners to get this. When we talk about hidden causes, We're talking about imbalances that could come from your diet and eating inflammatory foods like gluten and sugar. Maybe there are too many histamines in your cup, causing, some gut issues, some allergic reactions, and also mold and nuts. There's also copper toxicity, which could be a hidden cause of anxiety, Lyme disease, and also parasites. And this is big because there's such a huge link between anxiety and suicidality. And
Mhm.
that's why I'm really drilling down on, what are the hidden causes of anxiety? Because if we can reduce anxiety, we can reduce suicidality. In my head, suicidality is too big of a thing. It's the whale, right? So what are the little pieces that we can kind of chew away and then see how big the whale is when we get done? And anxiety is a part of that big whale there.
I,
So go ahead.
I, I was going to say, I think like hope is a really big piece of it, right? And so, a lot of times when you go to, I used to work in a locked psychiatry ward, actually as a social worker, and I saw, people come in obviously not great states. Suicidality was a big one, and I sort of watched what messages these people were given, and everyone left with more hope. So that's they still left with hope, but they weren't necessarily told that your diet can play a role, or you don't have to be on XYZ medication for the rest of your life, or it isn't some like healing of deep trauma that's going to take you 400 years of therapy to get at. Like there's also lower hanging fruit that can shift that. And I think that hope is often missing in a lot of our conventional approaches. When you do seek help, through a medical system, you're just not given it in the same way. You're not told that healing can happen at a physical level as well as an emotional one. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. You know what I really love that you said is you called it lower hanging fruit to look at, hope and what we're eating because yeah, to go back into your childhood and to when you were 9 and 5 and what happened to you at those moments, that takes years to unlock, to uncover, to for the healing to kind of take place. And really there's so many effective and impactful things we can do right now today that can at least not heal us of our trauma immediately, but at least start to soothe us, calm us, and relieve
Mhm.
the anxiety issues that we are experiencing.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And what I say to a lot of people is it's much easier to do a deep dive in trauma when you're physically stable, right? Like if you're going to unpack like really emotional trauma and you're eating sugary foods and your blood sugar's all over the place and you're living in a moldy environment, like there's no energy left for you to unpack that. Like your body's already chaotic. So if you can get your body to a more stable place to do that deeper work, then you're going to move a lot faster through that work, or it's not going to be, as emotionally intense when you're, coming back from your sessions and spending, 4 days on the couch or whatnot. It's a lot easier to do when your body is stable.
Absolutely. So, uh, what then are how do we heal anxiety holistically? Like you gave us 3 to 5 ways that there are hidden causes. What are 3 to 5 ways we can heal our body holistically?
Yeah. So let's start with the lower hanging fruit. Cut out the gluten. This is easy and hard all at the same time because, we're a society that lives off of gluten, and we love foods as treats. And so it can be difficult to do that, but I cannot begin to tell you how many people cut that out and then literally feel better within days. And they're like, no, it was just the gluten. And I was like, yeah, it was just the gluten. I have a client who did like tons of work on trauma, and she was undiagnosed celiac. And so as soon as she cut out the gluten, there was like her body responded. Yeah, she still needs to do the trauma work, but like, it's super easy to do. So that would be like number one for me is cut out the gluten. Number two, and this is more of a female thing, but if you're on birth control, get off of it. Find natural ways to, do birth control. There's lots of other options out there, but get off the birth control. And that can be scary in itself because you've likely been on it for so long, but another really easy but hard thing to do, right? Number three, and we sort of talked about this a little bit, is minerals. So really making sure that you're getting those minerals. And I talked about a couple of different ways to do that. So Googling, what foods are high in potassium, what foods are high in magnesium, making sure you have electrolytes. And I'm not talking about Gatorade, that's full of sugar and it's crappy. I'm talking about like Vega or, 40,000 volts, or even coconut water is a really great option. If you're living in mold, again, easy but hard, look for another place to live. Those are some lower hanging fruit options for you, right? That can cause a significant change, but doesn't involve emotional work.
I love that. And so, here we're talking about, getting rid of, cutting out the gluten, get off the birth control, making sure we get enough potassium and magnesium, either from coconut water or Vega, and checking for mold issues in your apartment and maybe even in your workspace. A lot of us spend so much time at work or, maybe some crappy factory. I have listeners throughout the world. And so to check, see, what the mold level is, and maybe you need to wear a type of mask that can filter that out. I don't know what kind of mask that would be, but, because I understand that quitting your job, it might be a challenge for you. So, but to find a way to address it or to detox it. And we also talked about doing a parasite cleanse. So these are very practical ways. Don't feel like you have to do this all today and all right now, right? Baby steps. It took you years, if not decades, to get to this place, and it could take that amount of time to undo it. But go at your own pace, because what we don't want you to do is to try everything all at once, then burn out, and then throw your hands up in the air, and then no change is made, right? So start off where it feels comfortable for you. Jodie, in terms of managing anxiety, we talked a lot about food and environment. Are there other things that you do, like journal, exercise, read, meditate, any of that stuff that you incorporate in terms of managing your anxiety?
Yeah, I do a little bit of cognitive behavior therapy. In my programs, I do limbic system work, actually, which we didn't really get to today. So the limbic system is the part of the brain that will trigger the fight or flight response in the body. And when that becomes hypersensitive, you get stuck in a fight or flight loop. And so there are kind of more of like, it's almost like a meditation, but it's very specific that will help to calm the limbic system down. Gratitude journal is another really big one. Exercise, I'm super cautious of because I think it's important, but I think it depends what your body's ready for. So, the people that go out and they are like, yeah, I have to exercise, to run like half an hour every day, and their adrenals are shot, their body can't tolerate it, that's actually making the problem worse. So for a chunk of people that I work with, their adrenals just can't handle, cardio exercise. So it looks different for them. But it's important for sure.
Okay. So, it's interesting because I've noticed that when I do higher interval trainings, like hit workouts, it
Mhm.
actually boosts up my carb cravings. And it doesn't relax me. It makes me a bit more jittery. And
Yes.
so, like walking, hiking, yoga, swimming, those are the things that I need to do. boxing and other, like, I can do those, but once again, it goes back to my cup, right? I can do those maybe once a week or every couple weeks or sporadically, but my Monday through Friday has to be more soothing, calming, restorative type of movement patterns versus the high intensity type of workouts. They just don't do well for me. But can you speak more to the uh, people's adrenals are shot? Is that because like we're in a high stress environment and then we're all drinking caffeine and then we're gonna like we're everything we're doing is just boosting our heart rate and never letting it rest? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a dance between external and internal stressors, right? So, I mean, 2020, pretty much everyone was stressed. So it's fair to say that did a number on everyone's adrenals, right? External stress, really, really obvious, fighting with your spouse all the time, stressful work environment, financial stresses. Those are all external stresses that are going to wear your adrenals down. But then we also get internal stresses, which are what we just talked about. If you have copper toxicity that's drawing out or like overactivating your adrenals, you're going to get issues there. If you have molds, like all of those things are also going to, tire the adrenals. And so what we tend to see is initially you'll get this amazing burst of energy, and that can last for years where you're like, oh yeah, I can do anything. I'm like Superman, I've got it. And then over time, the adrenals tire and they can't continue to produce, high levels of cortisol. And so you end up not being able to produce very much at all. And so then tasks like, cardio, like you're explaining, your body can't do. So I think of it like a battery. When you go to bed, you charge your battery, if you have poor adrenals, like 20%. And so, by mid-morning, you're done if you don't have healthy adrenals, right? But for people whose adrenals are just kind of getting going, they overcharge their batteries. So you charge your batteries like 120% at night. So you're like, oh yeah, I'm great. I got lots of energy the next day. But then if you do that for years, you're going to crash and end up completely exhausted. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think that what I really, because even I'm realizing this, is that um, what we've done in our teenage years, 20s, 30s, the go, it catches up to us in our 40s. And then we kind of hit this wall where, like you said, our adrenals get depleted, our cup is empty. And what we don't realize is because of what we've been doing for the prior decades. We think it's something we did yesterday or last night, or we go, well, I worked out yesterday and I ate well. I don't understand why I hit a wall today. When really your body it's an accumulative effect of all the things that we've been doing up to this moment, and now our body is just like the engine's just falling out. And but thanks to you, if we get a grip on those smoothies, and not smoothies, but the anti-inflammatory foods, and get rid of the mold and maybe do a little parasite cleanse, we can get back to it. So, you
Mhm.
know, part of what you shared in terms of healing anxiety holistically was get rid of the gluten and get rid of the gluten out your diet, get off birth control, increase your potassium and magnesium. You can use that through Vega or coconut water or 40,000 volts. Get out of a moldy area, whether that's home or work, and address your limbic system with some meditation, right? A little cognitive behavioral therapy. You get into those thoughts that might be, self defeatist. Gratitude journaling. I do that on a daily basis. I tell you what, I used to do it in the morning. Um, but I find that doing it at night is more soothing. So what I emphasize that because I also am learning that it's not just what we do, but when we do it that determines how effective it is, right? So for some people, meditating in the morning works. For some people, maybe before bed, that might be more effective. It's just about figuring out your order of operations. And then, as we mentioned, exercise, right? But for some people, you might need more soothing exercise, and other people can do, boxing and CrossFit and all those type of high intensity type of workouts. Jodie Ellenor, is there anything that we left off the table here?
I think we've covered a good chunk of it. And that's really kind of my mission, right? Is to help people realize that there's way more to the iceberg than you ever thought about.
I love it. What are you looking forward to, Jodie Ellenor?
What am I looking forward to? That is a great question. I am looking forward to continuing to help women understand. I love the ahas, right? I love when women are like, that's what I do, why I do what I do, is to get women to this place where they're like, I can live my life in a much better way now. And I had no idea before. That's what I look forward to.
I love it. And then plug all your things. How can people reach out to you, connect with you, work with you?
Yeah. So there is a really great guide. It gives you some easy steps, some of which we talked about today, the lower hanging fruit to heal your anxiety and begin to reduce it in 7 days. So you can find that at go.healingjourneyservices.com/5ways-1. So that is a great way to start the connection with me. I also have a Facebook group, Healing Anxiety Holistically for Women. That's another great option, or you can visit my website, www.healingjourneyservices.com.
And then last question, and I ask this of all my guests, because I always imagine there's one person listening in who may be on the precipice of wanting to end their life. Before you kill yourself, what would you say to them, Jodie?
Know that there's hope.
I love it. Thank you so much, Jodie. Thank you so much, listeners, for tuning in. Remember, this podcast is not a substitute for you going to get help, for you calling the 1-800-SUICIDE or 1-800-273-TALKS, or the other phone numbers that are listed in the show notes. Because I know I have listeners out there in Canada, the UK, France, the Philippines, Australia, and of course, America. So there are international phone numbers. You can talk, you can chat, you can text. If you need financial assistance with your mental health, there are organizations also listed in the show notes that can help you out with that. There's also the Trevor Project for LGBTQ, for the LGBTQ community. Go to thrivewithleo.com for one-on-one coaching with yours truly. Let's get to tomorrow together. Thank you so much, Jodie Ellenor.
You are welcome. Thank you for having me.